The most challenging type of question in IELTS reading is what we call true, false, not given. For sure, when we were in grade school, middle school, or high school, we've already encountered this type of question. But what's the big difference? Before, it was just true or false. In IELTS, what makes it mind boggling or confusing is the third option, which is not given. To be honest with you, true is the easiest to identify. But because there's false versus not given, what some test takers do after they check their work by looking at the answer key, they're telling themselves, wait a minute, why is this false? Or all this time, I thought it's false, but how come the answer is not given? I tell you, it's challenging if no one is going to explain why it's false, why it's not given. Like in any case, nothing is difficult if you are provided with the kind of information that will help you in identifying the correct score. I am not saying that I am the best in English or I'm a master of the language. I don't pretend to be one, knowing that I'm a non native speaker. But because I took the examination twice, one academic module, one general training module, one IELTS with British Council, and one IELTS with IDP, I'm going to share with you what I employed and considered an effective test taking strategy. Exactly the same techniques that our students have applied in the last 15 years of IELTS examination. Here we go with true, false, not given. There are cases, though, you won't encounter true, false, not given. Sometimes they call it yes, no, not given, or sometimes accurate, inaccurate, or not given. Please be careful because some people fail without them knowing why. Sometimes it's just a matter of following instructions. The other candidates wrote true or false, but the instruction required them to write yes or no. I understand that yes and true are related to each other with the same concept for this type of question, but yes is wrong if true is the required answer and vice versa. Remember, you can't get it wrong if you follow the instruction. Now, for true, false, or not given, what is the concept? You will be provided with a statement that you need to evaluate. Based on the passage, determine if this statement agrees, that means it's true, or it contradicts, that means it's false, or this information is not even discussed in the passage. For true, false, not given, the first suggestion, and this is consistent with our 3 easy steps to follow in reading, it is best that you read the questions first or read the statements first. But don't just read, identify the keyword, and then think of 3 possible scenarios. Number one, the kind of scenario that's in line with the statement, so that most likely is true. The second scenario, the one which is not consistent with the statement, chances are that's false. Or if ever that statement is not discussed in the passage at all, that's your not given. So, for this type of question, keywords in the statement may not always be the same keywords in the passage. In the previous video, I already told you to build your vocabulary because reading subtests is not just about speed. It's about understanding what you have read, especially the portions that contain answers. Class, let us begin with the suggestions on how you can possibly ace the true, false, not given type of question. Consistent with our 3 easy steps to follow in reading, the moment you find that statement or a version of that statement in the passage, identify it right away as true or false or not given. That's when you identify the answer to that question before you continue reading. An important technique that I figured out when I practiced for my IELTS examination, I have noticed that for true, false, not given, the answers are given chronologically in the passage. So say for instance, one passage 13 to 14 points. Numbers 1 to 7, true, false, not given. Where do we find the answer to number 1? For sure, somewhere in the first part. I'm not saying it's always the first sentence. I am not saying that it's always in the first paragraph. But what I'm saying is it's somewhere in the first part. Where do we find the answer to number 7? Towards the end of the passage. It doesn't have to be the last sentence. It's not the last paragraph all the time, but it's towards the end. Because remember, the answers for true, false, not given appear in sequence, chronological from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So what does this mean? After we have answered number 1, anytime soon, we're going to find the answer to number 2. But what if you are able to answer numbers 1 and 3? Something's fishy, right? Because if the answers are supposed to appear chronologically in the passage, how come we have not answered number 2, even if we're done with number 1 and number 3? The friendly suggestion, though, you go back to the passage, read the portions in between 1 and 3. Somewhere in between there, you will find the answer to number 2. But what if you went back to that portion in the passage in between 1 and 3 and still you cannot find the answer for number 2? One thing is for sure, the answer is not given. Here is the good news. You don't have to finish the passage before you can identify if something is not given. If ever number 2 is not discussed in between 1 and 3 in the passage, the answer is not given. With this, it's a tip that will help you save time, finish the examination before the time limit, and ace the test. Let's now move on to the various reasons. When do we say that the answer is true? When is it false? And when can we say that it's not given? For this slide and the succeeding slides, you will see 2 letters. Letter B stands for the passage. Letter S stands for the statement. The first reason why we say the answer is true. The passage and the statement have exactly the same idea, but always remember they don't use the same words all the time. To further understand, let's take a look at this example. What if the passage tells you every year there are at least, emphasis on at least. By the way, in the actual exam, there are no words which are highlighted. I just had to underline these words here to emphasize that they are the basis for our discussion. But you are on your own in the actual examination to find the key words. Going back to the highlighted words, at least 4 million non-native speakers were applying for a student visa in English-speaking countries. So that's the exact sentence in the passage. But what about in the statement? This is the one that you're going to determine whether it's true or false or not given. Let me read it for you. Every 365 days, there are more than 4 million student visa applicants whose first language is not English. They wish to study in countries where English is the primary medium of communication. Apparently, the passage and the statement have the same thought. But what did you notice? The words in the passage are not exactly the same words in the statement. What about the keywords? At least 4 million versus more than 4 million. What is the implication of at least 4 million? Minimum of 4 million. So it could be 4 million and 1, it could be 4.5 million, 5 million, or 10 million, but for sure, it is not 3,999,999 and below. What about the statement? It says more than 4 million. What's the implication if it's more than 4 million? It could be 4 million in 1, it could be 40 million, it could be 100 million, but it's not 3 million. So, at least 4 million versus more than 4 million. Not exactly the same words, but the thought is basically the same. So I told you guys, true is the easiest to identify. It's not a giveaway though, because if you don't understand that at least and more than are consistent with each other, then this is when you might not be able to get the required band score. Let's now take a look at the second reason why we say the answer is true. Here we go. P, which means the passage, and S, that's the statement. Passage and statement have different ideas, but even if they're different, they are consistent with each other. They do not oppose, they do not negate each other. The answer is still true. Moving on to our unique examples. The passage tells us applicants from the same country typically make the same choice. So what's the meaning of the word same? Similar. Let's now move on to the statement. The statement tells us people who belong to the same national group normally follow decision-making principles that were used by those who came before them. If you analyze carefully, both the passage and the statement did not use exactly the same words. In fact, make the same choices versus normally follow decision-making principles. Different words, but because they are still consistent with each other, they do not disagree with each other, we say the answer is true. I'd like to reiterate that true is the easiest to identify because true is never false and true is not given. But what's the reason why plenty of IELTS candidates call the reading subtest a headache? It's because there is a very thin line that separates false and not given. Now, I'm going to discuss with you the differences between the two, hoping that after this discussion, it will help you in better understanding this type of question and get better scores in reading. Here we go. I have 3 reasons for you why the answer is false. And what is the first one? P, or passage, and S, statement, are opposites. I used the same example earlier, but this time I changed one word. Earlier, or rather now, it's at least 4 million versus less than 4 million. Meaning of at least, minimum. Meaning of less than, maximum. Maximum versus minimum, they're exact opposites, right? So at least 4 million versus less than 4 million, because they're opposites, the answer is false. This is the easy part. But let's move on to the second reason. Another reason why we say the answer is false, the passage and the statement are not consistent with each other. I'll be using a different example now, so all eyes on these 2 examples. Please fight short attention span. You cannot be mentally preoccupied for the next portion of our discussion. Eyes on the prize. Imagine that you are doing this for your future in the hope of being granted a visa. Whether it's student visa, immigrant visa, or working visa, eyes on the prize. Here we go. The passage tells us the decisions of East Asians are based on historical perspectives. The statement tells us, according to research, East Asians usually consider social economic conditions before they come up with a decision. If you look at both of them, they mention a specific reason, right? A specific factor. But the passage focuses on history, whereas the statement focuses on social economic conditions. History is not exactly the same as social economic and vice versa, because the 2 of them are not necessarily opposites, but they do not pertain to exactly the same thing. That's when we say the answer is false. For others, this might be easy to identify. But the third reason for us to say that something is false, this is perhaps when the others are easily confused because no one taught them beforehand. Here we go. The answer is also false if the statement is missing. So what exactly do we mean when we say the statement is missing? In the passage, three details were provided. In the statement, only two of these three details are present. I'll use a basic example before I move on to the complex examples later on. Let's begin with the passage. The Niner digital ID displays the reviewee's name, nationality, and package. So those are the three details found in the passage. In the statement, though, the Niner digital ID highlights only the reviewee's name and nationality. You will notice there is an information which is missing, and that is the package. Some people might argue, oh, the answer is actually true because the passage contains both name and nationality. In IELTS, though, this cannot be true because the statement is not 100% accurate. The statement fails to mention a detail that was highlighted in the passage. Because the statement does not indicate the package, but that's an info found in the passage, we say the answer is false. I repeat, if the passage contains three details and the statement only two details, the answer is false, even if these two details are found in the passage. Why is it false? Simply because the statement is not 100% accurate. Before we move on to not given, let's have a recap. What are the three reasons for us to say that the answer is false? Number one, passage and statement are opposites. Number two, passage and statement are not consistent with each other. Or number three, the statement is missing. Let us now move on to not given. For our third type of question, which is not given, the answer is not given if it's something you cannot find in the passage. To be honest with you, you can only confidently say that it is not given if you have read the entire passage. So how would you know that it's not given? Well, I've read everything, and because I never encountered that, well, for sure, it's not given. But simply put, it's important for you to find where the answers are located. Because if the answers are given chronologically in the passage and you've answered number one and number three already, but number two it's not found in between one and three, then chances are two is not given even if you don't read the remainder of the passage. Another reason why we say the answer is not given, the statement contains an added information. So earlier, it's false if the statement lacks information. But now, the answer is not given if the statement has an extra information. So as not to confuse the beginners, I'll be using the same example. Let's begin with the passage. The three details are: the Niner digital ID displays the reviewee's name, nationality, and package. What about the statement? The Niner digital ID highlights the reviewee's name, nationality, package, and age. What did you notice? Age is something you only get to find in the statement, but that was not included in the passage. For sure, it's not true because the statement is not entirely the same as the passage. If it's the typical true or false without not given as an option, you might easily argue that this is false. But in IELTS, the reason why there is a third option which is not given is because the moment there is an added information, the extra detail is the one that makes the answer not given. So, to recapitulate what we have discussed for not given, number one, the answer is not given if that particular info is not discussed at all in the passage, or the statement has an extra detail which you cannot find in the passage. But listening to that portion of the discussion, you might think, oh, it's easy. However, it's different when you encounter actual IELTS reading, true, false, not given types of questions. Let's now move on to something a little more complex, something that resembles the actual level of difficulty. So I'll be giving you 4 examples. One by one, we identify whether the answer is true or false or not given. We start with something easy. Here we go. Notice that this example is somewhat related to our false and not given examples earlier, but this time I changed one detail. All eyes on the passage and the statement. The passage tells us the Niner digital ID displays the reviewee's name, nationality, and package. 3 details, right? But the statement this time tells us the Niner digital ID does not display the reviewee's name, nationality, package, and age. Class displays 3 information, does not display 4 details. So now, IELTS examinees, future IELTS passers, what do you think is the right answer? Is it true or false or not given? The correct answer is not given. Why? Initially, you might argue, displays versus does not display. So they are not consistent with each other. They contradict with each other. Sir, it's false. It might be false if they contain exactly the same number of details, like 3 versus 3. But what did you notice? In the passage, there are only 3 details, but in the statement, a total of 4 details. There's an added information in the statement, and that is the age. That is the one that makes the entire statement not given. So even if the statement contradicts the passage, just because of one vital information, this is the one that tells us that the correct answer is not given. Hopefully, with that example, now you are able to have a better understanding of how to deal with this confusing type of question. Moving on to the second example. Undoubtedly, the passage tells us religious elements are always involved in Bollywood movies. The statement, however, tells us viewers usually do not notice the religious elements in Bollywood movies. Let us dissect the passage and the statement further. You will notice that religious elements, that's something you can find in both passage and in this statement. Bollywood movies, that's something also present in both the passage and in the statement. So that leaves us with which detail? The passage tells us that yes, elements are present. But in the statement, viewers usually do not notice these elements because the passage does not say anything about viewers not noticing the religious elements. Viewers usually do not notice. That is the phrase which serves as our clue that the answer is not given. So for now, some people were able to get 2 correct answers. If you're 2 out of 2, you're on your way to that 9.0 in reading. If you're 1 out of 2, nothing to worry as we have 2 more examples. You can always do better. What's most important, you learn from these mistakes. Some people easily get demoralized or discouraged. But what's the good news? It's perfectly fine to commit these errors during the review sessions because whatever grade you get during your practice sessions won't affect your visa application. There is only one examination that matters, and that's the actual exam. It's best you encounter the mistakes now, you learn from these errors, so that when you take the actual test, you will get the required band score so that you don't have to repeat the examination anymore. Moving on to our 2 sets of examples for true, false, not given. We begin with the third example. The passage tells us there is a touch of Spain in the cuisine of the Caribbean islands. The statement, though, tells us Spanish elements must not be integrated in the Caribbean cuisine. One by one, let's identify which elements are found in both the passage and in the statement. Spain, an element found in both passage and statement. Caribbean islands or Caribbean cuisine, you also get to see that in both of them. But what's the difference now? The one that tells us whether the answer is false, true, or not given. Here we go. The passage tells us there is a touch of Spain. The statement tells us Spanish elements must not be integrated. If ever, the statement tells us there is no touch of Spain in the cuisine of the Caribbean islands, that would have been false. But that's not what the statement tells us, right? The statement tells us that Spanish elements must not be integrated. The phrase must not be integrated is the additional information making the answer not given. If, guys, you are 3 out of 3, well and good, because that means say you have a chance in getting the perfect 9 in reading. You might be wondering though, so how come this review center is called 9.09er? Well, it's as simple as this. The perfect grade in the IELTS is 9.0. And majority of our senior lecturers, Brian Shawson, Philip Aitona, Dan Solis, Lone Viardo, our lecturers have taken the IELTS, and in one or more subtests, we got the perfect 9. So the term niner is derived from the perfect score. The term niner is being given to someone who got a perfect grade in at least one of the 4 components. So if you're 3 out of 3, you are on your way to be called a niner in reading. Do not fret though if you were able to get just 1 or 2 correct answers, because you have one more chance to redeem yourself. Let us now move on to the last item. Passage tells us spices in the Gulf region are traded by land. The statement now tells us spices in the Gulf region are not traded by air. Ladies and gentlemen, traded by land versus not traded by air, the answer is not given. Why? You don't assume that just because it's traded by land, then it's not traded by air anymore. Remember, there are other possibilities like water or rail, right? I'm letting you know that the moment there is something which is added, it makes the entire statement not given right away. Notice that the answers or correct answers were not flashed, because in our 4 examples included in this PowerPoint presentation, all of them are not given. So now, what I need you to do is to apply whatever we have learned together. There is a big difference between a knowledge-based examination and a skills-based exam. In a knowledge-based exam, all you have to do is to understand the concept. Memorizing might help you in getting a better understanding. But for sure, if it is a knowledge-based exam, you don't have to practice a skill. But this is a skills-based exam. Knowing is just one half of it. Applying what you have learned will help you in getting what you're supposed to get in the actual examination. That is why after this lecture, the recommendation of 9.09er English, you answer practice tests. Well, as many as you can if you have plenty of time. And it also depends on your band score requirement. Always go back to the transmutation table in order for you to have an idea what's the equivalent band score of this in IELTS. If you're going to ask me which materials we recommend, well, your online review dashboard contains brand new, original reading passages with answers, and there's a rationalization portion for you to better understand why this is the correct answer. And we're so happy that our content development team has included a vocabulary builder. In order for you to determine the level of difficulty, we have labeled our practice tests as easy, average, and difficult. So you always start with easy. And then, as you get a grasp of how it's supposed to be in the reading subtest, that's when you move on to average. Then, lastly, try the difficult passages. If you are looking for other sources, we always recommend Cambridge materials because apparently this examination was developed by Cambridge. So the one that mimics the actual level of difficulty, definitely Cambridge materials. And for you to keep track of your progress, it's always best to record your scores. Hopefully, that discussion will help you in getting a better grade in IELTS reading, true, false, not given. Progress might not happen overnight. Remember, it might take one step at a time, but in the end, if you are tenacious, then you will get what you've been waiting for and what you've been dreaming of. Once again, this is Irvin Temporal talking about true, false, not given in IELTS reading. Other types of questions will be tackled by the other lecturers. Thank you for your time.